Nggak tahu. Ovan. Pak Ing mana?
Siap semua posisi.
Del. Sini aja Pak. Kelihatan. And we are also in the different and maybe late dinner. And welcome in the third international webinar 2022, Master Program of International Relation. And I believe this not only international webinar, maybe the intercontinental webinar, because we have the three continents. It's like the Asia, Europe, and South America, like the Brazil. Welcome in the third international webinar 2022 Master Program of International Relations, Jenderal Ahmad Yani University. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Anakar, and I will be the master ceremony for this event. The agenda for this webinar first is the national anthem of Indonesia, open by Professor Hikmahanto Juwana, Rector of Jenderal Yani University, photo session, and certificate distribution, and speaker. For first agenda, it's time to be enter the first agenda, National Anthem of Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, please raise. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please have a seat. Next agenda.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. All right, good. Okay, thank you very much. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, let me welcome you all to Universitas Jenderal Ahmad Yani. Our university is owned by the Indonesian Army. And we have not only soldiers who are registered as our students, but also civilians and those who have just graduated from the high schools. Now, prior to what I want to say in this welcoming speech, I would like the committee to run the video Ahmad Yani, if I may.
TNI Angkatan Darat melalui Yayasan Kartika Eka Paksi yang dibina langsung oleh Kepala Staf Angkatan Darat memiliki komitmen tinggi mewujudkan peningkatan kualitas pendidikan di Indonesia. Pada tanggal 20 Mei 1990, TNI AD di bawah naungan Yayasan Kartika Eka Paksi mendirikan Universitas Jenderal Ahmad Yani yang merupakan hasil penggabungan sekolah-sekolah tinggi yang dikelola oleh Yayasan Kartika Eka Paksi, yaitu Sekolah Tinggi Teknologi Jenderal Ahmad Yani atau STTA, Sekolah Tinggi Ilmu Ekonomi Jenderal Ahmad Yani atau STIEA, Sekolah Tinggi Matematika dan Ilmu Pengetahuan Alam atau STMIPA, dan Sekolah Tinggi Teknologi Industri Bandung atau STTIB. Unjani dalam perkembangannya senantiasa meningkatkan mutu dan kualitas pendidikan dari berbagai jenjang pendidikan vokasi, S1, S2, dan profesi. Saat ini, Unjani telah memiliki 10 fakultas dan 41 program studi terbaik, yaitu Fakultas Teknik, Fakultas Sains dan Informatika, Fakultas Ekonomi dan Bisnis, Fakultas Kedokteran, Fakultas Ilmu Sosial dan Ilmu Politik, Fakultas Psikologi, Fakultas Farmasi, Fakultas Teknologi Manufaktur, Fakultas Kedokteran Gigi, Fakultas Ilmu dan Teknologi Kesehatan. Dukungan penuh senantiasa diberikan oleh TNI AD melalui Yayasan Kartika Eka Paksi, di mana saat ini akan transformasi mulai dari pengembangan gedung dan ICT yang bekerja sama Jaya Karya dan PT Telkom Indonesia. Yang dikenal sebagai Smart Military University ini memiliki kekhasan yang berbeda dari perguruan tinggi lain, yaitu memiliki mahasiswa yang berkarakter disiplin, loyal, dan santun. Tidak hanya itu, Unjani memiliki keunggulan yang tidak dimiliki oleh perguruan tinggi lain di Indonesia, yaitu bersinergi dengan berbagai institusi yang dimiliki oleh TNI AD, khususnya dalam melaksanakan magang, penelitian, dan lain sebagainya, yang telah diimplementasikan melalui berbagai bentuk kerjasama. Sebagai perguruan tinggi yang dimiliki oleh TNI AD, Unjani berperan aktif dalam mendorong para prajurit TNI AD menempuh pendidikan sarjana maupun magister guna menyiapkan sumber daya manusia yang unggul dalam organisasi. Dalam beberapa tahun ini, Unjani terus melakukan berbagai upaya dalam mengejar ketertinggalan guna mencapai mutu pendidikan yang unggul dan mampu bersaing secara nasional maupun internasional.
Thank you very much. May I welcome all of you today to this international webinar on Russia-Ukraine conflict from the security, foreign policy, and international law perspective. I would like to thank the organizing committee from the International Law Relations Department of Universitas Jenderal Ahmad Yani, and also the speakers of today's international webinar. I please apologize if I mispronounce your name. First of all, Dr. Anastasia Mehan. She's specializing in Russia securitization, an independent researcher from Coventry, UK. And then we have also Dr. Olga Zuravskaya, a foreign policy analyst from Belarusian State University in Belarus. And also Dr. Alexander Tikhomirov, a foreign policy analyst also from Belarusian State University, Belarus. And last but not least, Dr. Anatalia Suisinskaya. She's an international law expert from Adam Mickiewicz University in Poland. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has gave a lot of attention from the world, and the world also impacted by the war in Ukraine. Of course, there are a lot of endeavor being attempted by various countries to make sure that the conflict come to an end, and also the war being terminated. But I understand it is very difficult because the Ukraine war, this is not only a war between Russia and Ukraine, but also between Russia and the US and its allies, in particular the NATO's member. And our President Jokowi, has attempted to make peace on the war by stating that if the war continues, then the one who is going to be impacted is the third world countries, and millions of people, and probably also billions of people will be affected because the supply chains of food will be disrupted. And of course, we will have a food crisis. But we know there is a progress now. The progress is Russia and Ukraine have agreed that the food supply chain will not be harmed by the war. And as I understand, yesterday or the day before yesterday, there are ships who are getting the wheat from Ukraine to be passed from the Black Sea. So this is a progress. But unfortunately, last night, probably most of you watched the news, the Speaker of the House of US Congress, Ms. Nancy Pelosi, visit Taiwan, and this has made the tension in our region, in Asia Pacific, to be increased. And China, of course, does not like this, and China has warned the US that it will take stringent steps against Ms. Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. So this may come to another crisis. The Chinese may launch an attack against Taiwan, especially probably the same as Russia, and China will also says that they want to make sure that the territorial integrity of China is preserved, and no other countries will support the separatist movement from China. So we will going to see another crisis. So we have big crisis after the pandemic. We have the pandemic crisis, and then the Ukraine war crisis, and now we may see a crisis in Taiwan. But of course, there are perspectives from various observers from the world, experts. And today we will hear the expert from Belarus, from Russia, and Poland on what and on how they see the crisis. And I think this is very important. As an Indonesian, we need to learn from our experts from other parts of the world, especially those who are near to Ukraine and Russia. And we hope that we will be enriched with their expertise, and then Indonesia can also contribute to the peaceful settlement of the war in Ukraine. So that is the purpose of our international webinar at the moment. With that, I have to end my remark. Again, I would like to thank the speakers in this international webinar, and also those participants who will follow the discussion, and hopefully our Indonesian participants can ask various questions to our experts from various parts of the world. I thank you very much. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Professor Hikmahanto. Next agenda, we will provide local souvenir and the certificate from head of department for the speaker who will be represented by Dr. Stanley, and for to Dr. Iing Nurdin. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, next agenda, we will have photo session with screenshot. Maybe we begin to slide 1. Please, operator. Okay. Okay, we have the 5 slides. Slide 1, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Slide 2, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Slide 3, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Slide 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. And slide 5, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Before we go to the speaker presentation, we will to introduce a Master Program of International Relations, Jenderal Ahmad Yani University. Please, VT, operator. Okay, thank you. And we also have the journal in master program of international relation, Journal of Global Strategic Studies, is the first published in June 2021 and to publish leading scholarship in the study of international relation and comparative politics. And now we go to the main agenda is the presentation. The presentation will be led by Dr. Iing Nurdin as moderator for this agenda. Dr. Iing Nurdin is the lecturer of international relation, master degree and bachelor degree, and he also the chief of research in Jenderal Ahmad Yani University and also researcher in Asia Pacific Networking for the Citarum Harum, and for the research is like the member of the money politic for the general election legislative and vote buying for the local election in West Bandung and etc. And now, please welcome Dr. Iing Nurdin. Dr. Iing Nurdin, please.
Oke, terima kasih Mr. Taufan Akbar. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for Rector Unjani, Prof. Hik, for your opening speech, and honorable speakers, and all participants. First of all, let us thanks to Almighty Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala because His blessing we are able to come here to join in this third seminar, the third international webinar 2022. I am very pleased to see you here and welcome to the International Webinar 22 organized by Master of International Relations Department, Faculty of Political and Social Science, University of Jenderal Ahmad Yani. The topic is Ukraine conflict, securitization, foreign policy, and international law. This international webinar I am to discuss conflict arising from the perspective of security, foreign policy, and international law by presenting and competent speakers in their respective fields. The speaker parties of the conflict, Associate Professor Dr. Alexander Sikamarov and Dr. Olga Zurawska, Belarus, Dr. Natalia Tichinskaya from Poland, and Dr. Anastasia Mahon from UK. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Iing Nurdin, Lecturer of International Relations Department, FISIP Unjani, and I will be serving as your moderator today. Okay, before we get started, few minutes your first to be available for viewing post conference. And each presenter today will have total 20 minutes for the presentation. We will hold most questions until the end of the session, and then I will read question out loud for the presenter to answer as time permits. Any question we cannot get to can be answered in chat in conference for the session, or you can connect with speaker one-on-one to private message or meeting. Now we're moving along to the main session, and we will hearing a presentation from our speaker. But let me read the CV first. The first speaker named Dr. Anastasia McMahon. Professional experience, independent research, educational background, PhD in political science, University of Canterbury, Christchurch, New Zealand. Research expertise, global security and terrorism. And his and her main publications, educational responses to the challenges of COVID-19 global pandemic, online provision and its consequences for the social resilience of minority communities. This is article in journal Globalization, Societies and Education. And then a pivotal event narrative in critical terrorism studies, COVID-19 and the threat of terrorism. Journal of Critical Studies on Terrorism. Realism and Study of EU-Russian Relation. This is the book chapter in the Routledge Handbook of EU-Russia Relations, Structure, Actor, and Issues. The second speaker is Associate Professor Dr. Alexander Sikamarov. Expertise Foreign Policy of Belarus and Russia Federation. Okay, main publication Foreign Policy of the Republic of Belarus, and then article Poland in the Foreign Policy Strategy in the Republic of Belarus in 1990s. The Belarus in a system of international security, and then Latin America as a foreign policy priority of the Republic of Belarus. The last, the Eurasian component in the foreign policy of the Republic of Belarus. Work experience, 1993 to 2004 in the Institute of History of the National Academy of Science of Belarus as junior researcher, and now head of department. 2000, at present time, he is an associate professor in Belarusian State University. Dr. Alexander will be accompanied by Dr. Olga Yorovskaya. Professional experience, 2019 at present as senior lecturer, Belarusian State University. Expertise, foreign policy and diplomacy, international security. Education, PhD in history and publication, the Republic of Belarus participation in NATO program Partnership for Peace. Belarus NATO interaction, problem of sources classification, and more than 20 articles published in Russian. Last but not least, Dr. Natalia Tichinskaya, expertise international law and Russian legal system and diplomacy. Professional experience, she is lecturer in Faculty of Law, Adam Mickiewicz University. Okay. She has many publications. If I read this take time, but I will read Natalia's. Okay. Crimea and liability of Russia and Ukraine under European Convention on the Protection of Human Rights. And then the case of city, Sevastopol, domestic international law, and so on. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's please welcome to our first presenter, Dr. Anastasia Mahon. She will presenting about Russia securitization. Dr. Anastasia, please, now your turn.
Thank you very much. I'm just gonna share my screen. Can you see the slides?
Okay.
Great. All right. Good morning, everyone from England. It's not even 8 a.m. here, so it's a bit early, but the sun is shining. And today I'm going to talk about securitization narratives in the war in Ukraine. Specifically, I'm going to focus on the rhetoric of Nazism, Nazification, and denazification as part of the agenda, of political agenda for the conflict. So what is securitization? Securitization, also known as securitization theory or the Copenhagen School of Security, is one of the latest significant theoretical developments in the security field. it allows us to understand security beyond the realism ontology and analyze non-state security actors, non-traditional security threat, and in general to broaden security studies. Securitization can be seen as a process of altering politics by political actors when they break free of what we call normal politics, which is the way of doing politics in a given country that is considered to be normal within the law. And by breaking free, I mean those actors can circumvent existing political rules, but that can be done only in exceptional political circumstances. So securitization theory analyzes and explains how those political actors can orchestrate, create, portray different issues, existential threats, in order to create exceptional circumstances, allowing themselves to gain power and resources. Securitization is considered successful if an issue at stake is elevated to that level of emergency response and it is assigned emergency measures. And by that, political actors who are behind the process, they get access to resources and power. However, despite being quite an attractive political tool, securitization is quite dangerous as a way of bringing political change, pretty much because it brings political change in an uncontrollable, disruptive way. And existing political regimes that we have currently in the world, they are not capable of doing any system of checks and balances on securitization process. Thus, even in democratic settings, it is a dangerous political tool that disturb existing political and legal systems. However, for us as researchers and analysts, for people who want to understand how certain issues can rise to the top of political agenda and why that happens and who can make that happen, securitization is a way of tracing that process. Okay, so the case of Russia. How do we create exceptional circumstances? And what is existential threat? So just let me move here a little bit. So this is just a little bit of the speech that Vladimir Putin gave on the 24th of February 2022 before Russia invaded Ukraine. So here you can see that he says the purpose of this operation is to protect people who for 8 years now have been facing humiliation and genocide perpetrated by the Kyiv regime. To this end, we will seek to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, as well as bring to trial those who perpetrated numerous bloody crimes against civilians, including against citizens of the Russian Federation. So here we can see almost for the first time, he actually spells out demilitarize and denazify Ukraine as part of an existing political agenda. The words that are highlighted in yellow, humiliation and genocide, you can see how when you read it or you listen to it, it creates that sense of fear and anger and the feeling that Russia has been marginalized in the current political situation. Here you can see this is a real banner that was used by the Kremlin in Crimea before the referendum, in which Crimean people overwhelmingly voted to join Russia. Here you can see that denazification rhetoric has been used by the Kremlin for quite some time now, but it hasn't been so outspoken. So here you can see that there are no, the banner reads, on the 16th of March, we choose either left or right picture. So you can see that there is no word Nazis or Nazification, denazification, nothing like that. But despite that, anyone who sees that banner can understand what it means. So this is the map of Ukraine, which is colored either as a Russian flag or it's a Nazi state with barbed wire and red color. So anyone who sees the banner understands the message, even without it being said out loud. And there's been a lot of rhetoric like that produced by the Kremlin in the last 10 years. Here are some examples of how that rhetoric has been created and shaped. And that is, in my opinion, the basis for the creation of a favorable environment for securitization to be successful. So first of all, it's the constant reiteration of the same warmonger rhetoric, constant repeating what happened in Donbass, the previous speech that I showed you a bit of, when he talked about humiliation and 8 years of genocide by the Kiev regime. That was a reference to the events in Donbass, the annexation of Crimea, obviously. Also, the Kremlin regime has been referring to the World War II very often, that saying that we can do it again, implying winning a war in Europe, and the constant reiteration of the same rhetoric kind of installed that feeling in the Russian public. Also, the regime has been very clear that Russia and Russian people should be wary of the outsiders and external forces that are portrayed to be out there to get Russia. And it doesn't matter what face do they wear. It could be a generalized the West, it could be NATO, and its expansion towards Russia that's been very concerning for Russia. And in the latest months, especially after the invasion, Russian officials have been using that term Anglo-Saxons, kind of bundling up the US and the UK and using it as a quite marginalizing term, implying colonialist past and failed attempts to restore justice. It's quite in use now. You can even hear the main spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova. She's using that quite a lot. Another idea that greatly contributed to the spread of the securitization rhetoric is that idea that Russia has its own unique political future, political path, and that democracy as such is not necessarily the right way for Russia. Russia is going to develop something of its own. Another very persistent idea is the world, Mir, which means that being Russian means more than just a passport. So there is a difference between and Ruski, which Ruski is as an ethnicity, it's a wider concept. It's very vaguely defined, which basically allows the Kremlin to justify their political and military interferences and advances as support for Russians anywhere in the world. Also, over the last 10 years, the Kremlin regime has been making political dissent and any alternative political thinking very difficult in Russia. However, after the invasion of Ukraine, they basically made it into a crime. So any anti-war sentiment, anti-Kremlin sentiment can cost people their lives and livelihoods, huge fines, jail time, what is called a black ticket, so not being able to find any job anywhere apart from very very labor intense job, especially that's concerning the intellectuals that are still in Russia. Here you can see what's been a similar statistics that's been reported by the Western news as overwhelming support that you can see in Russia for the invasion of Ukraine. So this is the graphic is from Levada Center. It's one of the think tanks that is still in Russia and working. They've been assigned the label of foreign agent, which makes their life very difficult, and that means that they have foreign financing, but being called a foreign agent in Russia almost equals to being called a spy and a traitor. So the question asked was, do you personally support the actions of Russian military forces in Ukraine? So the dark blue is definitely yes, light blue is more or less yes, orange is more or less no, red is definitely no, and gray, it was difficult for me to answer. And the first line, you can see that the total of 48% definitely said that they definitely support the action of Russian military forces in Ukraine. However, if you look at the age differences, you can see that people who are 40 and older, the amount of people supporting the actions there, it's almost 10% more than the previous younger category. And I would argue that these statistics is not representative of what people actually think of Russia's action in Ukraine, but this is representative of what respondents thought they were supposed to respond, what they thought their opinions were supposed to be like, because the environment in Russia is so hostile to any ideas and ways of voicing them. So if you're not specifically and outspokenly pro-Kremlin, it could be very dangerous to actually say what you think you believe. So this data, in my opinion, is representative of the securitization rhetoric being accepted and in action and spread it to the level where it's actually changing reality that we see. So where do you find the Kremlin securitization rhetoric? Quite often it is rather difficult for people who don't speak and read Russian fluently to find information and reliable sources on where to read and watch things in English. So I would recommend sources like Kremlin.ru. They have good English. Part of the website, Russian state media, Russia Today exists in English. TASS and other state medias like that. Also, Russian politicians and official people have been quite active in Telegram lately. So you can find Telegram channels of Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Russia's embassy in the UK, they have their Telegram channel in English. And the channel of Maria Zakharova, it is in Russian, but it is a very interesting way of following what the official Ministry of Foreign Affairs what they put out there, kind of resources they're using. Also, you can use websites of Russia's military forces, the military of defense. However, they are blocking their military content from definitely from the UK and other unfriendly countries. So if you look up counterterrorism and terrorism, things like that on their website, and you don't find anything that says access denied, then you just need a VPN to access their information. All right, so how do we know that securitization is successful and that the rhetoric of Nazification has been accepted as part of the existing political agenda? Here you can see that the idea of denazification has been taken beyond the conflict in Ukraine. Here you can see Vladimir Djukanovic talking that everything seems to me that Serbia will be forced to begin the denazification of the Balkans. I like to be wrong. That was tweeted just 3 days ago. As you know, the conflict in Kosovo is unraveling very quickly, and this is a part of the rhetoric surrounding it. And you can see that even if you know nothing about, the politics in the Balkans, Serbia and Kosovo, because if you heard something, but you're not an expert in the field, when you hear the denazification of the Balkans, you know what it means. You know what it implies, and that tells us that the rhetoric of denazification has been accepted by the global community as part of political agenda. But unfortunately, it also tells us that desecuritization is quite unlikely. Desecuritization meaning that an existing issue would be downplayed as an existential threat. And we can see that an increased usage of the term, an increased interest in it of other politicians, that makes it quite unlikely that it would just dissipate and go away on its own. So quick conclusion, to summarize the main points that I wanted to deliver, that securitization is a universal tool for political change, but it is dangerous because its usage is impossible to control. So I would argue that it should not be used to achieve political change, but unfortunately, it's been widely used around the world as it is a rather cheap, easy, and fast way to get to the resources and power for politicians who are not extremely interested in fair play. Also, desecuritization is less likely than an increase in securitization rhetoric based on the existential threat of Nazism. As we can see, other politicians and countries are starting to use that in delivering their political agenda, which is a worrying trend. Also, I just wanted to reiterate that the Kremlin has spent many, many years, at least the last 10 years, actively preparing the public for potential conflict with the West. And in part, that's why the Russian public did not seem as outraged as the West would have liked. But as I mentioned, showing you the statistics from the poll done by the Levada Center, it is not reliable information that's coming from polls like that. And we cannot just take it at face value and say that Russian people support the war in Ukraine. That's not the case, but it does show that the securitization rhetoric has become part of everyday life, and it's everywhere in Russia, from every state channel, newspapers, radio, TV shows. Every day people listen to it, and it does control the agenda in the country. Thank you very much for listening to me. I would be happy to answer any questions during question time.
Oke, terima kasih Dr. Anastasia Mahon. This is
I'll
a
stop sharing my
nice
screen.
presentation and very informative.
Thank you.
Hopefully my students is very nice. I will hold this question and we will open the session of discuss at the end of a presentation. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Now we're moving along second speaker. Please welcome Associate Professor Dr. Alexander Sikamar. Will be speaking to us on Russian foreign policy, and is accompanied by Dr. Olga Jurovskaya as translator and speaker too. Dr. Alexander, please welcome, and this is your time. Excuse me, Professor, you are still mute.
Sorry. Now
Thank you.
you must listen me. Hello, dear colleagues. I will speak about foreign policy of Russia, but I apologize, my English is not so good. Then help me, Miss Olga Jurovskaya. I will speak in Russian. He must help me in English.
Oh.
So let's start my thesis to begin. Итак, российская внешняя политика. Российская внешняя политика, ее основные особенности. Прежде всего нужно отметить, что российская внешняя политика является активной, нацеленной на закрепление независимости, суверенитета и статуса центра силы в международных отношениях. Российская установка в области внешней политики допускает возможность использования силы. Ольга?
Okay, Russian foreign policy, and please, could you just next slide demonstrate? Okay. So the features or peculiarities of Russian foreign policy. The first is that it is active foreign policy aimed at consolidating or strengthening independence and status of the center of power, or even superpower status in the international relations, allowing the possibility of using force in some actions.
So, please, sorry, continue, please.
Okay, so the next point is that the Russian foreign policy is of expansionist character, aimed at global projection or so-called global influence and territorial expansion. This territorial expansion is considered as a guarantee of security. And first of all, of course, the attention or main interest is paid to neighboring countries, adjacent territories of the Eurasian space. The third feature is resource-based or resourcefully secured, because we know that the Russian Federation has a lot of gas, oil, and other mineral resources. And the fourth is just this absence or devoid of distinct ideological component, like maybe in other countries, but possessing a clear, just pretending to be imperialistic country, to be empire, the ideal of a strong and large state. So about features. The next about so the next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
The next slide is strengths. strengths of Russian foreign policy. It's just Dr. Alexander Tikhomirov presents in such a way of thesis of SWOT analysis, if so I may say so. So strengths. The first aspect, consolidated power that weakly dependent on the public opinion. The second point, passive society, and as it was already demonstrated, majority of population support the idea of strong state. Then a developed military-industrial complex, of course, it's out of the question, and the ability to produce weapons based on the latest technologies. Not only raw materials, of course, but nuclear, missile technologies, IT technologies, IT sector, because it's evident and well known that Russia is recognized nuclear power, one of 5 in the Security Council of the United Nations. So this fact is unquestionable. Then the fourth aspect. Sometimes there are ambitious, there is strive for independency, this great desire. And of course, the fifth point is that there is more flexible economic and ideological system in comparison with the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. Because different mechanisms and tools are used and different political parties exist with their ideology. Please, the next slide. Weaknesses. Of course, each foreign policy of each country has its weak sides, weak points. The first is emotional. So everything is based on the feelings, on the perception, by willingness to conduct systemic work. The second point, again, unwillingness to work with the public opinion, in particular opinion abroad. The third point, passivity in the development of legal standards, of these high legal standards that are internationally recognized. The fourth point, demographic problems. It's evident that there is a reduction of population, low growth, some problems with birth rate, etc. Of course, economic problems also exist because despite the fact of presence of new technologies, of their development, still it's insufficient sometimes and ineffective. And this dependence on extraction of raw materials, of mineral resources, of oil and gas, or as it is called, oil pin, of course, is a vulnerable point. And point 6, lack of clear and attractive ideology. Again, so what is this slogan? What is this motto of a political system? It's unknown for sure. Then next, please. Here just there is a lot of text, so I just will explain some aspects. Russia nowadays is not in position of full international. Of course, just after this active phase of conflict, there are deterioration of relations with the United States of America, Great Britain, the European Union, Canada, Australia, Japan. Some difficult, some problem relations with South Korea and Turkey. There are sometimes problems with CIS countries. It means countries of Commonwealth of Independent States, of ex-USSR countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia. But at the same time, of course, the Russian Federation develops and maintains active dialogue with China, India, on bilateral basis and within BRICS organization, then ASEAN, Asia South Pacific, the goals have changed. And we cannot exclude nowadays the elimination of political regime, such case. And as we have seen, majority of Russian society approves this idea, around 40% in different age categories. Also, there are some doubts among population about this slow movement of a Russian army, of military operation in Ukraine, of slow advance on Ukraine territory. And sometimes this war in consciousness of people is perceived like confrontation with West, with the USA, with NATO. And still, we should mention that decisive role in implementation of military operation belongs to perception of Ukraine as security threat from 2015, because there began medium intensity conflict and in the east of Ukraine. And of course, this vivid desire to prevent Ukraine's admission to NATO, because of course the Russian Federation is against is against NATO expansion to the east and the inclusion of new states, in particular those friendly countries or those countries of the Eurasian space. What are the mistakes that other actors have done? First of all, is the usage of force and constant pressure on the Russian Federation. Just this, if I may say so, enforcement to follow their rules, but not some compromise. The second is opinion of extreme expansion of Russia, because actually this expansion is not so extreme and vivid. And the third mistake, that idea on Russian decentralization, secession of its federal republics, overestimation of international regional contradictions and conflicts that were, for example, in 90s, sometimes there are certain maybe cases in Caucasian republics, but still the general mood and the general attitude of people inside the Russian Federation is quite the opposite of this great, strong state. And what are just our vision and our forecast? That military defeat of Russia is impossible or is not possible. Sanctions, in particular economic sanctions, influence both sides, of course, but more the European Union, the West. And Russia may overcome these difficulties and consequences of this crisis. And the conclusion just. Next slide, please. First of all, the existing restrictions do not prevent Russia from military operation, because it is still continuing with some success or some failures, but it's continuing. The next, Russian leadership doesn't set goals to conquer the whole Ukraine, but to expand some zone of influence of control on the Ukrainian territory. The third point, of course, Russia doesn't aim and doesn't want conflict with NATO. But the possibility is not excluded if some countries of NATO intervene or just take part in the conflict, and it is proved. So Russia will have some operations with NATO. And the fourth point, that Russia continues its rapprochement with China, also cooperation, and actually this Western policy, Western attitude, and even yesterday event is enhancing and promoting it, just facilitating this. And we may say that in the history of Russia, there were moments, there were some times when the eastern direction, east vector, became more significant than the west one. So now the Russian Federation is at this position again, and just Ukrainian issue should be understood and should be regarded, analyzed just in this context, only in this geopolitical context of eastern vector and eastern direction. Thank you very much for your attention, and we are waiting for questions during discussion session.
Thank you for your attention. Olga, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, you're welcome. Okay. Dr. Alexander and Olga, the question will be held until the end. Okay. And now I will invite the third speaker, Dr. Natalia Tichinskaya from Faculty of Law, Adam Mickiewicz University, Poland. She will be speaking about conflict and international law. Please.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I would like to thank you for invitation, and especially for organization committee and Dr. Steinle for organizing such webinar. And I will share my screen, just a moment. Okay, I have some troubles with sharing, however, if it is okay. And today my speech will be a such mix, a little bit of international law, a little bit of human rights law, a little bit of international humanitarian law. And started to talk about, and main aim is to show how these events in Ukraine influenced residents of Crimea and Ukraine, and started to talk about 2022 when Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the start of special operation Ukraine. We need to start from year 2014. It was March 2014 when took place an event which initially caused disbelief among researchers of international law. The Autonomous Republic of Crimea, which was an integral part of Ukraine, suddenly became part of the Russian Federation. And on the 7th March of 2014, the Republic of Crimea proclaimed independence and sovereignty, with Sevastopol as a city acquiring special status. The decision was taken on the basis of the Declaration of Independence of Crimea and the results of the Crimean referendum. On the same day, the President of the Russian Federation recognized the Republic of Crimea as an independent state. On next day, an agreement was signed between the Russian Federation and the Republic of Crimea and city of Sevastopol on the accession of the Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol to the Russian Federation. On the basis of this agreement, the Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol became a federal subjects of the Russian Federation, and it all happened at a dizzying pace. At that time, the Russian Federation has argued that all legal acts connected with Crimea independence and its admission to the Russian Federation were lawful acts under rules of international law. And the main argument was the separation of Crimea from Ukraine was an act of self-determination. Besides of that, Russia used other legal arguments such as invitation, humanitarian intervention, or responsibility to protect, threaten of regional stability. Among many other countries, as well as in Ukraine, there is a perception that this accession needs to be qualified as an illegal annexation. As we see, Russia purports to provide to acceptable legal basis for its conduct. Unfortunately, we don't have now time to discuss all these arguments, however, they're very interesting, which Russia used. From the point of view of international law, the casus of Crimea was extremely challenging. Why? Because we can see as particular state once more have engaged in so-called twisting law in order to justify their action under law. Obviously, international society already had to deal with intervention, for example, in Kosovo, in Iraq, which were doubtful from the point of view of international law. However, in case of Crimea, there was important difference. Previous interventions have affected a change in the regimes of other states. None in the modern era has done so with the purpose of seizing territory. And it's the main thing that changed Russian activities in Crimea from activities from another states in that countries. And we should remember that the reaction of third countries to the events of 2014 was not too sharp. Obviously, most states recognized the as illegal. Sanctions were introduced by European Union and most Western states. However, we shall remember that these sanctions in that time didn't have a strong impact on the Russian economy. And the states continued to maintain relations with Russia. After a few years of development of this situation, there were voices among some Western politicians that in principle we had a fait accompli, and it might be good to find some legal solution for this situation. For example, it was proposed to use television. So we that after 2000, it was as usual with Russia, as we now say. However, now we have year 2022, when in early hours of 24th of February, Russia launched a large-scale attack against Ukraine. By the following day, Russian forces were closing in on Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital. And now Russia has created a new and utterly sad textbook example of violation of the Prohibition War. The rule, which was first enshrined in the Kellogg-Briand Pact, and the use of force in Article 2.4 United Nations Charter, one of the most fundamental principles and rules of international law. As I said above, states never openly admit violations of international law. And what is the Russian formal justification for using the first arguments, Russia is using force in self-defense pursuant to Article 51 of the Charter to protect itself from some kind of threat emanating from Ukraine. This, on the facts, looks like a theory of preemptive or preventive self-defense. An armed attack is not imminent against Russia in any conceivable way, but there is an existential threat so great that it is necessary to act now to prevent it. However, at this point, we all know that probably 999% of international lawyers, including Russian ones, hold that any such theory of preemption is categorically incompatible with Article 51. The text of Article 51 of the United Charter is clear and speaks of the right to self-defense arising only if an armed attack occurs. There can be no self-defense against future attack. Second argument, it's an argument of collective self-defense of the supposedly independent Donetsk and Luhansk Republic. The validity of that argument would be entities, states. In my opinion, they're not, and the recognition of these entities by Russian Federation will not change it. However, and also depends on whether Ukraine attacked these two new supposed states. But even if we take this argument at face value, the extent of Russia's military interventions appears impossible to square with the customary criteria of necessity and proportionality. And finally, as it seems, there is something like a humanitarian intervention argument. Russia is acting to stop or to prevent a genocide of Russians in eastern Ukraine. But again, the basic problem here is that the contested side, humanitarian intervention, is rejected by international law, by international lawyers, as a valid exception from the prohibition of the use of force. So again, as we see, we are dealing with great power, which openly flouting international law and try to twist law in order to justify their action under international law. Why am I talking separately about these two events, 2014 and 2022? Obviously, you could argue that Russia's armed attack against Ukraine began all the way back in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea and intervention in the Donbass, and that legally the full-scale invasion was simply a continuation of that came before it. That's true. But at other it also is reasonably clear that invasion in 2022 has been regarded as a game-changing separate event by all parties concerned, and a new use of force require its own separate justification. If we will compare justification in 2014 and 2022, we will show you. And comparing these two events, we should say Ukraine is not Crimea. In the first case, annexation was carried by Russian Federation in so-called velvet gloves. Obviously, the Russian Federation violated the international law. However, the occupation of Crimea was achieved without bloodshed. Besides of that, a large majority of the population of Crimea were in favor of this reunification. We shall agree with it. Moreover, the Russian Federation operated in Crimea through unmarked troops. They didn't use Russian army. They used Russian army, however, as unmarked troops. And this all suggested that at that moment in 2014, Russia did care about its international audience. And knowing that international law matters for this audience is important, it has chosen a less open form of invasions. And the effects on the populations were all different in 2014. In 2014, it's only resident on Crimea appears to be in worse situation. Please imagine the situation that you go to sleep in Indonesia, or Singapore, or Poland, or another country, and wake up, for example, in North Korea. And in 2014, it took place in Crimea. On March the 18th, people went to sleep in Ukraine, but following day, they woke up in Russia. The Republic of Crimea suddenly became a federal subject of the Russian Federation, and Russian law should govern all its legal relations. So after the accession, Ukrainian law ceased to apply, and the law of the Russian Federation began to apply in Crimea. The main transition period was the Russian Federation up 2015. At that day, so for 9 months, the normative legal acts adopted by an Autonomous Republic of the Crimea and by city Sevastopol were binding in the Republic of Crimea unless they were contrary to the constitution of the Russian Federations. So also Russian's law were applicable in that period. So changes in this law have directly influenced residents of the territory of the Republic of Crimea, who proved to be in the situation that we could call as legal vacuum. Because obviously, Ukrainian and Russian legal system grew out of the Soviet legislation. Nevertheless, during independent development of these two countries, both legal systems have accumulated some difference to approaches to various legal institutions. And from March 2014, residents of Crimea have to conclude legal transactions that evoke the legal evoke the effects in the legal system completely unfamiliar with them. And during that period, this 9 months, the inhabitants of Crimea lived in legal limbo. So in legal chaos, as you want. This chaos reigned in all spheres of life: judiciary, taxation, upon all important issues in people's lives, such as problems of the citizenship, business, taxations, healthcare. Besides of that, also after the accession of Crimea to the Russian Federation, human rights protections in Crimea have been severely curated. There have been cases of death and disappearance of people after February 2014. Crimean authorities have also restricted the right to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, freedom of association, and freedom of religion and belief. The situation of ethnic Ukrainians in Crimea and Crimean Tatars started to be worrisome. There were violations of their linguistic and cultural rights. And the residents of Crimea found themselves in a situations where the law of two states, Ukraine and the Russian Federation, were applicable at one and the same time on the same territory. And in addition, the citizens were not sufficiently aware and prepared for the fact that Russian and Ukrainian law are quite different. Furthermore, the professionals whose task is to apply the law, judges, notaries, employees of judicial authorities, faced the same problem as another residents. In such situations, the rights for fair trial and effective remedy were for Crimean residents very limited, if not absent. And the only possibility that Crimean residents have, it was the right to bring their complaints of Russian as well as Ukraine to the European Court of Human Rights. As for the end of 2021, there were more than 4,000 individual applications related to the events in Crimea. It was only possibility for residents of Crimea to have justice. However, now we have completely different situation. With missile and aerial strikes across Ukrainian territory and Russian ground forces entering Ukraine from multiple directions, there is no doubt the Russian Federation has used force in the sense of the Article 2.4 of the United Nations Charter against Ukraine, and has done so on a large scale. And now we should remember that it is war, it is hostilities. So direct hostilities cause that Russia as well as Ukraine, have to comply the rules of national humanitarian law. According to information that we received from mass media and several reports of international organizations, such violations occurred on Russian side. However, please be noted that according to some reports of OSCE, there are also violations on the Ukrainian side because it is hostilities. So, however, we should say that violations committed by the Russian Federations are by far larger in scale and nature. And I want only to point some examples of such violations of international humanitarian law. For example, it's connected with conduct of hostilities. We remember that under international humanitarian law, the assessment of whether the rules regulating the conduct of hostilities were violated is based not on the results. For example, what was destroyed or who was killed or injured, but on what and who was targeted. Targeting civilians or civilian objects is a violation of international humanitarian law, and it is a war crime. There are evidence that civilians were targeted. Next, in international humanitarian law, we have so-called specially protected objects. For example, it's hospitals and ambulance. And only on the first months of the conflict, according to different sources, there are between 50 and 80 hospital and ambulance that were destroyed and damaged. Even assuming that some attacks were directed against facility engaged in acts harmful to the enemy or were incidentally harmed by attacks against legitimate targets, this cannot explain the large number of affected facilities. So we should remember that that international directed attack against hospitals and places where the sick and wounded are collected is a war crime. And also we have deportations. There are evidence on forced deportations, children as well as adults from occupied territories to Russia. And only one remark in this place, I want to pay your attention that we should distinguish violations of international humanitarian law and war crimes. States commit violations of international humanitarian law. Human beings commit the war crimes. A war crime can only be found if an individual perpetrator can be determined and he or she acted with the necessary knowledge and intent or in case of common responsibility. So some violations of international humanitarian law can constitute war crime, but only in case if the responsible individuals can be identified. And also this armed conflict has a major impact on the enjoyment of civil and political rights. It's not only international humanitarian law, but also human rights law, including some of non-derogable rights, such as the right to life and the prohibition of torture, right to liberty and security. And also we shall remember, so the conflict not impact only this right to life, for example, but also impact social, economical, and cultural life because the conflict interfered with the provision of service, which are vital for the normal function. And conflict has population. Yes, I'm finished. 2 minutes.
Okay.
2 minutes. I'm finishing. Thank you. The conflict has affected the population, and this is the difference between 2014 and 2014 at some point. The armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine poses a challenge to the existing international order. After this event, the order will no longer be the same. The fundamental mutual trust between countries has been undermined since the end of the Cold War. It will be necessary to revise this order by placing emphasis on the security of individual states and their groups and self-sufficiency. So this is a great threat for the future of humanity. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry that I was so long.
You're welcome, Dr. From yeah. But in Indonesian. Oke, pembicara yang pertama, Dr. Anastasia Mahon, ya, dia dianggap sebagai sebuah alat, ya, atau instrumen aktor-aktor negara untuk membuat kebijakan, ya, dalam sebuah agenda. Kemudian beliau juga menjelaskan bagaimana membuat sebuah atau menciptakan sebuah lingkungan yang bisa mendukung sukses dari keberadaan sekuritisasi itu sendiri. Kemudian yang kedua dari Associate Professor Dr. Alexander Skamarov, ya, beliau berbicara tentang landasan politik luar negeri Rusia yang cara terdiri dari aktif, ya, artinya bagaimana kemudian Rusia ingin menjadikan dirinya sebagai center of power atau ingin meraih kembali posisi Rusia sebagai negara adidaya pada masa Perang Dingin. Kemudian landasan yang kedua adalah bagaimana kemudian juga dasar dari politik luar negeri Rusia itu adalah ekspansi, artinya bagaimana mencoba untuk meluaskan pengaruhnya, memproyeksikan pengaruhnya, tidak hanya sekedar kemudian di negara-negara Eropa, tapi di negara-negara yang lain. Dr. Alexander Skamarov juga melandaskan analisisnya pada analisis SWOT, ya, yang dia melihat pada kekuatan yang dipunyai oleh Rusia. Yang pertama adalah konsolidasi dari kekuatan yang ada, kemudian adanya kekuatan yang lain itu karena masyarakatnya yang cenderung pasif, karena memang mungkin sistem politiknya yang relatif belum demokrasi. Kemudian yang ketiga juga didukung oleh pengembangan militer industrial kompleks. Kemudian juga kehadiran dari ambisi-ambisi yang ada dari para pemimpin negara, ya. Sementara kelemahannya adalah cenderung emosional, kemudian tidak punya niat baik, kemudian ada problem kependudukan, problem ekonomi, dan tidak adanya tujuan ideologi yang jelas. Dan pembicara yang ketiga, Dr. Anastasia, dia berbicara tentang bagaimana kemudian hukum internasional atau international law, ya, atau ekspansi yang dilakukan oleh Rusia itu kemudian mencederai keberadaan dari hukum internasional itu sendiri, sehingga diharapkan tidak hanya sekedar penegakan hukum internasional, tapi juga bagaimana hak asasi manusia juga bisa diterapkan di negara Ukraina. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, now we are come to discussion session or question and answer session. There will be 2 sessions, and each session is 3 questions. If there is still time, we will continue with other question or the other participant. Please raise your hand and don't forget to mention your name and institution before you giving a question, giving opinion, or your response. Okay. Oke, silakan para peserta yang lain. Oke.
Excuse me.
Oh, oke, ada. Tunjukin yang nanya.
This is me on the right.
Oke. Okay, Mr. Hairul Anwar, please.
Yes. Thank you very much for this occasion. I am Brigadier General Hairul Anwar. I would like to raise several questions, maybe one by one. For the first time, it was stated by Russian does not want a big war and comply international law. If it is counterparties do the same, I would like to ask question regarding this statement. As a student, we need to know what is the main problem that caused Russian and Ukraine have a conflict? This is the first question. The second one, I address to Dr. Anastasia. After knowing the several aspects about the conflict, but we need the peace. Okay, so maybe you can explain what kind of diplomacy should be executed to squeeze or to release the conflict escalation between Russia and Ukraine. Yeah. And the last, for the last one, the third, regarding the international law, what kind of sanction probably to reduce conflict tension? So every country comply the UN rule. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hairul Anwar. Next, I will collect the question for attendant host. Okay, Pak Rizal Yusuf, silakan.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Major Rizal from Ahmad Yani University in Indonesia. I have a question for Dr. Natalia. In your lecture, you thought that one reason that Russia invaded Ukraine is preemptive strike. In my opinion, if every country have opinion like that and regard another country is a potential enemy, so then there will be chaos, there will be violence in everywhere. So can you explain more about preemptive strike? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question, the last. 41 citizens.
Hello,
Okay,
my name.
Hello, yeah.
Hello, my name is Angie. I am from Universitas Jenderal Ahmad Yani International Relationship Program. I would like to ask to the speakers, to the doctors, in this Russian-Ukraine conflict, is there any Zelensky politics policy that infringement with the international law, especially in the Crimea case? Thank you. Terima kasih, Bapak.
Bisa diulang, Ibu Mbak Anji?
Okay. In the Russian-Ukraine conflict, is there any Zelensky politics policy that infringement with the international law, especially in the Crimea case? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is there 3 questions? Yeah. The first from Mr. Hairul Anwar. Yeah. This is the questions about what's the main problems. What is the main problem that caused Russia and Ukraine conflict? And second, special for Dr. Anastasia, what kind of diplomacy that can resolve this conflict? And third, about international law, how to make every single country comply to international law. From the Mr. Rizal Yusuf, can you elaborate about preemptive strike? And the last, from Ms. Angie, is there any about this from international law? Okay, first I will please Dr. Anastasia first.
Thank you. So if I understood correctly, there are 2 questions for me. One, what caused the conflict, and another one, what kind of diplomacy can help to de-escalate. Regarding the first question, what caused the conflict? It's difficult to pinpoint a simple answer, but I would say that that conflict has been on the cards for quite a few years now. And after the annexation of Crimea, it was clear that Russia has changed its foreign policy more from dreaming about being a superpower to actually engaging into some activities that they see as a path towards being recognized as a superpower. It hasn't really played out the way they intended, but the continuation of that conflict was imminent. And in my opinion, it's really a breakdown of communication. So the Western counterparts, they don't want to listen what Russia really wants, and they don't recognize that need for international participation and recognition that Russia is in a desperate desire for. And Russia doesn't really want to see itself for the country it is. In my opinion, they overestimate their political and military capabilities, which we can see in the conflict of Ukraine, because their initial estimation was 3 days to Kiev and the new regime or whatever they wanted to do. It didn't play out that well. And from all the reporting from Ukraine, we can see that their military and logistic capabilities are nowhere near where they wanted them to be, and I think nowhere near where they expected them to be. As to addressing the second question, how do we achieve peace? What kind of diplomacy can be used to de-escalate the conflict? I think I have quite a pessimistic view in that regard. It seems like diplomatic channels have been breaking down a lot lately, and especially with the new development and Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan and Russia supporting China in its outrage against it. It seems like diplomacy from the Western part of the world is not at its greatest, and many would see that as a provocation, which makes a possibility for the de-escalation in Ukraine it is diminishing, in my opinion. I would really like to see Zelensky and at least somewhere higher up in the food chain in Russian politics meeting and discussing issues more openly. I don't think that the meeting of Zelensky and Putin is possible. I don't think that Putin would take the security risks that are associated with that. And neither should Zelensky, in my opinion. But it is, I think diplomacy has been failing us so far, and not even shuttle diplomacy performed by European leaders helped at the beginning of the conflict. So it is, I think Russia intends to win the war, whatever that means for them. It could mean, splitting the country or achieving and keeping the land bridge, or, slowly chipping away. Whatever their aims are from the official rhetoric that you can see from political leaders, I wouldn't say that they are massively interested in any kind of diplomacy at this point. Which is a very sad sentiment, but I think that's what it is. Thank you.
Dr. Anastasia, Now, Dr. Alexander, what's your response about what kind of diplomacy that can stop this conflict? Maybe you can give some opinion.
Tanya ke Olga.
So just our opinion, yeah?
Yeah. Help me, Olga.
Yes, of course.
Good. The question was?
Just the question, the same question. What is the main problem that, то есть тот же вопрос, Александр Валентинович, по поводу причины.
Конфликт начался не в 2022 году, а в 2014 году. И международное право уже не действовало к этому моменту. Оставалось только чисто военное решение. Но перед этим 8 лет все-таки были попытки решить проблему дипломатическим путем. Эти попытки были неудачные. Please translate.
Okay, so the main aspect is that this conflict, Russian-Ukrainian conflict, started not in 2022, but in 2014, and the international law by that time was not acting and was not applicable. And during 8 years, there were some diplomatic attempts to find the solution, but they were ineffective, and as a result there was only a military decision, military way out of the problem to regulate somehow the situation. That's it.
Россия уже не доверяла странам Запада в качестве посредников. Доверие к ним ушло.
The Russian Federation wasn't confident about their work and didn't have any faith into their actions and into their actions.
Было мнение, что военным путем удастся решить проблему быстро.
It was an opinion that military solution would be rapid, as it is called in military strategy.
В нынешних условиях стремление к решению проблемы дипломатическим путем не просматривается.
In present conditions, the intention to solve conflict diplomatically is no more evident and seen.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay. You're welcome. No, Dr. Natalia, that's it.
Okay, you mute.
You still mute.
I'm sorry. I have 3 questions, and I started regarding the questions. Sanctions will influence the end of the conflict. It is very hard to say at this stage. We had 5 months of sanctions from March till August. At this stage, we don't see any influence of these sanctions of Western states to the changing of position of the Russian Federation. These sanctions are severely than the sanctions in 2014. So it seems that it had to change the position of Russian Federations. However, I'm not optimistic in this issue, and probably we will see the changing of position if these sanctions will hold by European states for a longer period. However, I'm also not an optimistic when I see on the position of Western European states. Some Western European states started to try to soften these sanctions. So in my opinion, in a near future, we will see the influence of sanctions to the ending of the conflict. In my opinion, it is only the diplomatic way. However, my colleagues stated that there are no such possibilities. I'm as an international lawyer believe in this diplomatic way, and I hope that probably states will try to found such position. It is for the first question. As for the second question regarding preemptive, what is a preemptive attack? It is an armed attack which is not imminent against states in any conceivable way, but there is an existential threat so grave that it is necessary to act to prevent it. And you are right, it is very dangerous. Russian Federation uses it now to use force in self-defense using the Article 51 of the United Charter. And according to mostly opinions in international law, and according also to this Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, it is not possible because Article 51 speaks is the right of to self-defense arising only if an armed attack occurs. So states cannot use the Article 51 against a future attack, against a preemptive attack. So it is very dangerous, and it could provide to using this by another states. We had such examples when, for example, in 2008, in Kosovo, were used the right of self-determination, and the borders of this right were strengthened. And in 2014, we saw as Russian Federation used this strengthened borders of the right of self-determination and used in Crimea. So it is possible that another states will also use the explanations of Russian Federation and will use this preemptive attack or preventive self-defense. And as for third questions regarding Ukraine policy, is Ukraine policy is incompatible with international law? In my opinion, if we will not discuss international humanitarian law and human rights, because Ukraine, as any states in the world, violated human rights during the war conflict. Ukraine also violates international humanitarian law, but the position of Ukraine to find resolution of, for example, Crimean issue is compatible with national law. Ukraine take all possible legal steps. It is used International Court of Justice. It is used International Court of Arbitration of Sea. So all existing courts and tribunals which existed international are used in a legal way by Ukraine. So we will see the Ukraine tried to find legal solution using all existing methods that international law provide for it. So thank you very much.
Ali, okay. You said that only diplomatic mission will be make peace or the end of conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Dr. Natasha, what's your opinion about that?
I'm sorry, could you please repeat the question a bit louder?
Okay. Dr. Anatoly said that only diplomatic mission will be make peace between Russia and Ukraine. What's your opinion?
Oh, thank you. I think Natalia means not diplomatic avenues per se, as the leaders coming together, but Ukraine trying to resolve the problems through addressing the issue through existing legal channels, which is absolutely the right thing to do. From a security perspective and from a military perspective, as many of you would relate, the most important problem with doing that is who's gonna enforce the decision of those legal bodies, even if they rule in favor of Ukraine and say that the annexation of Crimea was illegal and Russia should return Crimea. And Russia says no. Who's gonna enforce the decision? So there is an understanding among security experts that if it comes to that, and if that's the case, where diplomacy and legal avenues have been exhausted, and there is gonna be no one to enforce the decision of those legal bodies, then it's gonna be we're gonna be impasse politically, and Russia understands that perfectly, and I think that's why legal process as such. Obviously, everyone wants to collect evidence and build a very convincing case, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the question: who's gonna make Russia, for example, give back Crimea? Who's gonna make them leave Ukraine? Because if you think about the Western counterparts stepping up, sending troops, or boots on the ground, as it's called, that's going to be an escalation of the conflict, not the de-escalation that we are looking for. And there are some radical views within the security community that legal rulings in favor of Ukraine could potentially be used as an excuse to escalate the conflict. I really hope that it won't get to that, but I don't believe that Russia would comply with the rulings of international legal bodies, and it's been withdrawing its participation from many international bodies lately, and I see no reason why they would honor the decision made by those legal bodies. It is very unfortunate, but it's been the problem with the International Court of Justice, for example, for years. Who's gonna enforce the decisions? So I think that the legal rulings that hopefully should be in favor of Ukraine, they're very, very important to build up the case internationally. And as Natalia mentioned, to maybe stop the spread of using the case of Russia and the annexation of Crimea by other countries as the basis for their questionable political decisions. So that I think that would be beneficial for Russia, Ukraine, and the international community. But I think for the immediate de-escalation of the conflict in Ukraine, we're more likely, if we were to see any diplomatic efforts, that would be either some shuttle diplomacy or direct diplomacy between the leaders, or someone close to Zelensky and Putin who are more open and keen to direct communication. And of course, when we have an active conflict, an active war, direct diplomacy is the quickest way to achieve some kind of resolution. It hasn't been done so far, and you know, all the humanitarian corridors and what's been negotiated so far. There've been reports of them being violated. So it's still work in progress. But hopefully, if there was something to happen, I think that would be through direct diplomatic channels.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Natalie. Which country or international organization must take responsibility of being a mediator to resolve the problem? To resolve the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Which country?
Yeah, in my opinion, it is the role of international organizations. And for example, we saw it. For example, this evacuation from Mariupol, it was International Committee of Red Cross. For example, now we have released the shipping of grain from Ukraine, and it is also was mediation of United Nations. So the role of international organization is extremely key.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we will move in the session 2 in discussion, and I will open 2 questions from the participant. Okay, Putri, please. Wait a minute, please.
Check. Check. Okay. Thank you very much for all credible speakers today. I am enlightened by all of the point of views and perspective from all of the speakers. And by that, I would like to ask 2 different questions. But the first, the key of the securitizations needs an actual threats. And the threats, it is responded by the country to the means of a policy in a certain agenda. The first question, how can Russia maintain their agenda settings towards this conflict while at the same time also considering public opinion, especially inside of a country, in facing international society's response? And the second question, is there any possibility for the public opinion to change or affected by external factors, in example, such as political elite or international society, no matter how strong the public define them as the part of Russian or national citizens? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Putri. Okay, the last question, maybe? Okay, let's first, Dr. Alexander. How Russia maintain their agenda setting toward this conflict while at the same time also considering public opinion, especially inside of country in facing international society response? For your opinion, Doctor?
Okay, could you just repeat the question one more time?
Okay, how Russia maintain their agenda setting toward this conflict while at the same time also considering public opinion, especially inside of country in facing international society response? Okay.
Так, Александр Валентинович, нам вопрос.
Slide, please. Public opinion.
Значит, да, вопрос о том, что как Российская Федерация продолжает сохранять данную контекст войны на повестке дня, если общественное мнение, скажем, внутри страны вот такое расколотое считают, а также, что мнение за рубежом вообще тоже против этого.
Во-первых, нету общественного мнения за рубежом сильно против. Да? Я уже говорил, что только проблемы с западными государствами. Внутри России общественное мнение больше сориентировано, тут и показывала Наталья, на войну.
So, okay, just a second. Firstly, public opinion abroad is not against, and it's really difficult to take into account which society, which public opinion should be regarded. And it is not against. Then inside the Russian Federation, as we understand the question, the public opinion is for military operation, as Dr. Anastasia demonstrated in its presentation. Levada sent just a quiz. So, the next. You may continue.
Это я или...
Ну, вы можете продолжать, если вам еще что-то есть сказать.
Ну, очень часто общественное мнение выступает даже в России за продолжение войны и за усиление вот этих военных действий, а не за их прекращение.
Very often, the public opinion in Russia supports the continuation of military action, of military operation, and not its end and its stop. That's it.
Россия еще не исчерпала ресурсы для ведения войны.
It happens just because the Russian Federation possesses enough resources for continuing and releasing this military operation. Despite sanctions, it has some military potential.
Да, по этой причине конфликт будет продолжаться и не будет решен в ближайшее время дипломатическими средствами и с помощью международных организаций.
So, just our opinion that the conflict will be continuing in near future and wouldn't be solved in a diplomatic manner or with the help of international organizations, just because the circumstances and the situation promotes to this position.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I
please. Okay, Dr. Anastasia, please.
I only wanted to add, because I agree that Russian society support or not again war. And also it's important to remember that international law is not an important system of law for Russian society. They not understand why this international law is important. And one day I saw such cited from the Russian scientist of history, Edward Radzinsky. He told that you Europeans believe in law, but we Russians believe in reliability. And in my opinion, it is explanation. Yeah, so it's our truth is on our side. Thank you.
Alexander, maybe your response, Dr. Alexander.
Yeah.
Your response, please.
Yeah.
Мне вам перевести, Александр Валентинович?
Ну, переведи, да.
Ну, соответственно, то есть было сказано, что да, вот мнение внутри России, что за войну или, точнее, не против войны существует, но, как говорил Радзинский, соответственно, что Россия не верит в международное право, но полагается на reliability, на надежность, да?
По-другому. Вы, европейцы, верите в международное право.
Международное право.
Верите в право. Мы, русские, верим в справедливость.
В справедливость, да, вот как я хотел. Спасибо.
Ну, вот так и будет.
Ну, то есть, скажем так, наше мнение спрашивают, соответственно, то есть, если Российская Федерация пытается, значит, восстановить справедливость, наверное, для народов, то надо это как-то сказать.
Ну, Россия, я уже сказал,
Как бы.
что она не очень сильна в агитации, так сказать, мобилизации зарубежного общественного мнения. Свое общество пока в справедливости убеждено. Это достаточно для ведения конфликта.
The Russian Federation is not strong enough in activating the public opinion abroad and just creating the total support there, but the public opinion inside the country is strongly believing that it is justable and that it will be justice for these republics, Donetsk and Lugansk, and this conflict. Thank you, that's it.
Dr. Anastasia, maybe your last opinion?
Sure. Again, from the security perspective, it is important to, in order to support that level of emergency politics and to keep up with that agenda of Russia being under a constant existential threat from the West, it's very important to not to let the Russian public to be exposed to what they call, what the Kremlin calls Western propaganda. So that's what has been happening for the last 10 years, you know, all the legal restrictions on freedom of speech, on the right of assembly, all that created a certain environment within Russia. Imagine it as a filter, the Kremlin creating a filter for the Russian people through which they process whatever is coming from the outside. And as long as the Kremlin controls the filter, we can call it the securitization rhetoric, we can call it propaganda, we can call it whatever we want, but as long as it's in place, the Kremlin would control the agenda within the country. And through these years of building insecurity, building untrustworthiness of the West in the eyes of the Russian public, the Kremlin achieved the creation of that public that sees the securitization rhetoric, that sees the Kremlin's propaganda as something very normal. Undeniably, for some people, that would be their reality. You know, if you only consume Russian TV and you have no other avenues to get your news from, or you don't talk to any other people who are not into that, that's going to be a very distorted reality that Russian people see. I would argue, though, that the war in Ukraine is creating some kind of, not necessarily an opportunity, but some kind of people who left Russia, who were very anti-war at the beginning of the conflict. They left Russia and they created some kind of, you know, intelligentsia in exile, so to say, which is not a political opposition per se, and it may never go that far. But there were definitely people who were, you know, important public figures, known people in Russia who left Russia as a protest against the war. So there is a certain level of dissent happening. It's not happening at the very kind of ground level, mass level, even though we've seen protests in Russia. But what the regime is doing, they're making the protest and political dissent more and more taxing on the individuals. So your personal liability is increasing. People get fined. Fines are enormous. People get jailed. People lose their work. People's life shatter if they share any kind of anti-war sentiment. And even though it's very easy to judge people for not saying anything or not doing anything where you're actually not in the country and not facing the hardships that they are facing. So I think it's a good time to check our privileges there. But I do believe that there is a significant amount of people that are against the war. And what I tried to show you with the Levada Center poll is that they are not necessarily sharing the opinion that they are sharing because they believe in them, but because the securitization rhetoric, the propaganda has been installed in the country to the level where everyone understands that this is what is expected from them in order for them to keep living their lives and not being thrown in jail. And it's impossible to blame people for not speaking up in such circumstances. Not everyone is prepared to leave the country and only take one suitcase and your children and run in the middle of the night. Not everyone is capable of doing that. And those who stayed, they do what they can do. And I think it should be respected. And I don't think that talking about the Russian public as something meaningless and something that's just that doesn't have the voice, I think that's a very simplistic understanding of what's going on in Russia. And I think there is much more there to uncover. Thank you.
Statement, maybe?
Я бы сказал, что пока российское общество не готово к прекращению войны.
So Dr. Alexander considers that nowadays, at the present moment, the Russian society is not eager for ending war, for stopping it. That's it.
Okay, thank you for all speakers. Nice discussions. And finally, now we have reached the end of this international webinar. Thank you very much, Dr. Anastasia Mahon, Associate Professor Dr. Alexander Sikamaruk, Dr. Olga Jurevskaya, and Dr. Natalia Tiskansa for addressing this interesting topic and great presentation. On behalf of International Relations Department, Visi Pinjani, we appreciate and thank you for joining us today. We can keep contact and collaboration in the future. Hopefully, I would like to thank to all attendees from our university, lecturers, students, and Master of International Relations Department, and everybody who gave support for these events. Once again, thank you to all our presenters today. Please give applause for thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Iing Nurdin, for the amazing discuss. Before we go to the final step, I invite to Dr. Stanley for speak something or say something to our speakers. Please, Dr. Stanley.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I would like to extend my gratitude to my friend. The first one is Dr. Anastasia and also Dr. Natalia Dr. Alexander and also Dr. Olga, thank you very much for being with us in this webinar. There are a lot of ideas that have been shared, and all our students, I believe they have learned. There are a lot of things from you. Again, just would like to say thank you very much for joining with us. Maybe next time, if we have a program and also webinar, we would like to invite you once more again. Or if the situation more better and you want to come to visit Southeast Asia, especially to Indonesia, please contact us and we will arrange anything for you. We would like to invite you to come to our university. The Smart Military University in Indonesia, the only one smart military university in Indonesia. Again, thank you very much for joining with us this afternoon. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Stanley.
Good afternoon, Dr. Stanley.
Yep.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you, Dr. Stanley. This is the final step. We apologize for our mistake and thank you for coming and attention in this webinar. See you in the 4th International Webinar, International Program of Master International Relation.
Okay.
Kasih video.
Yes, thank you. On the 4th International Webinar in Master Program of International Relations, Jenderal Ahmad Yani University.
Recording stopped.
Silakan duduk, kita foto dulu. Baik, kita foto dulu.
Mas Baskoro.
Del, foto di sini. Yoga. Di slide 2.
Mang Yus.
Oh, sini loh.
Siap, Mang. Petunjuk, Mang. Arahan, Mang. Udah, Mang. Mang Yus.
Thank you.